Hello Game Makers, this is GameMaker Rob, and today we are going to be covering vehicles, including a buggy so we can move across land faster, as well as using a ship to move across the world as well. So let's get started. I forgot to add one thing for our deleting save files from last time. We're not deleting the one that we make for the name, level and gold. I totally forgot to add that in. All we need to do is inside obj init step event, inside load game, where we delete save file, we want to add this as well. So delete the save slot stats file, and that's all we have to do for this. And now we can move on to our vehicles. So the first thing I will show you are the Sprites SPR buggy and SPR ship. Very awesome sprite work from me, if I do say so myself. It took me all of 5 minutes. What's important in showing you this is the sprites all match the E directions enumerator, which is north, east, south and west. This is so we can display the correct image for when we are moving around. And the first thing we're going to do is in obj init, in the create event, we are going to add a few things inside the movement variables region. We're going to add a new enumerator called EPL vehicle, and it's going to hold walking, buggy and ship. Basically what vehicle is the player in at the moment, and we're going to be using this to affect our player movement. And also we're going to store the vehicle the player is in global.pl vehicle, and we're going to be using this quite a lot going forward for this. So once you've got that down, make a new object called obj vehicle, and in the create event we want an alarm. We want it to run in 1 second. I'll explain about this in a minute when we go inside the alarm event. And we're going to set the image speed to 0 for the vehicle object, so it doesn't keep cycling through its sprites. And the default vehicle type is going to be a buggy. Don't forget to assign a sprite to the vehicle as well. It doesn't matter actually what sprite you assign to it, because we're going to be setting that in the draw event anyway. So now in the alarm event, create an alarm 0 event. The first thing we want to do is make sure that the player can actually board the ship or buggy. If it's don't place land vehicles on a piece of land that the player normally couldn't move on. But with a ship, we want to make sure the player can walk onto it, so we need to make that piece of water walkable when the ship is created, or the vehicle is created. And here we're going to set the sprite index based on whether it's a buggy or a ship, and that should be good enough for now. So now if we go ahead and add 2 vehicles to our world, I'm going to add a buggy just over here, and I'm going to add a ship just here. I've also deleted the battle object, so I don't have to keep fighting a load of battles. And inside the ship, I'm going to say vehicle type equals EPL vehicle dot ship. So they're not going to do much right now, but if we run the game, we should see a ship and a buggy, and we should be able to walk onto the ship, and then that's it. Nothing else should happen. There we go, cool. It's worth noting that because we allow the player to walk on that tile, it's going to be walkable all the time now. So we're going to sort that out later on. Okay, so now we're going to add two things to our player object. Inside step event, we want to go into the movement region, and for now, down at the bottom, just after we set can move to true and we set the sprites, we're going to check to see if we're actually in a vehicle, if we're colliding with a vehicle. So if collision point XY object vehicle false, what this is going to do, this is going to check if we are on top of a vehicle at our coordinates. It's going to return an instance ID if we are, or no one. So the ID of the vehicle stored inside this variable, and then we're going to set our vehicle global to the vehicle type. So it's going to be either buggy or a ship, and then we're just going to destroy the vehicle object because we're just going to move around as the player. And then inside our draw event, originally we just had draw self. Now we are going to say if we are walking, then draw self. If we're a buggy, then draw the buggy and the facing of the player as well. That's what's going to determine the sprite. So north, east, south, west. And then that's it pretty much. It's just the same for the buggy and the ship. So if we run the game now, we should at least be able to enter the vehicles. I always delete the save game before I start because quite often I'll get a crash because the game's changed. So if you're getting crashes, that's why as well. Just delete it and start a new game. So now I've entered the buggy. I've become the buggy. All my sprite has changed. And we can actually enter the ship as well as the buggy and become the ship. And then move around as a ship. That's because we haven't done any movement code at all. So this will all change, don't worry. But this is what you should have as now. Moving around the land as a ship. Okie doke, so we are now going to go back into the step event of the player. And in our movement region again, after this bit, we normally will just have this. If can move equals false, check the target tile is free, that kind of stuff. But all we've done now is we've made this into a region called walking a buggy, and we've added a check to see if the vehicle is walking or if it's a buggy, and if it is, then just do normal movement. And then, so otherwise, if it's a ship, then we're going to do this region. So all we're doing really is checking to see if we're trying to move onto land, which is 0. And if we are trying to move on land, then we're going to create a vehicle underneath the player. And we're going to set the vehicle to the current global, which is going to be ship, because this only runs if the player vehicle is a ship. And then we're going to set the vehicle, the global vehicle, to walking. So if we now run the game, we can actually sail around in a ship. Okay, so we can now sail around, and if we land somewhere back on grass, then we're just a player again. So it works quite well. Limitations on this at the moment is this is the very left edge of my grid, so I'm not able to move past this grid, and this is the very top left corner. So this is where it gets stuck. The way that I'm going to get around this is just by having 4 warp objects on the sides, and it's going to wrap me around to the other edge of the world. So if I go up here, I'm going to spawn back at the bottom, and that will allow me to sail the globe. It doesn't cover all bases. Say for example, we warp now, we're not going to be seeing the bottom edge of the island anymore because it's too close to the edge. I'm not too bothered about it in this test map, but if you haven't made your world map yet, then if you have a lot of water on the edges, that's the best way. That's the easiest and simplest way to get around this. Otherwise, we have to mess around with the collision grid to make it larger, but that covers that for now. And also, if you have any other sprites on the collision layer, like I'll show you. So on the world map, let's just hide all of the layers apart from collision. So if you see, I've only got water and mountains. If any of these mountains were touching the water, I could potentially sail into them because it would count as a 1 and not a 0. So if there was a mountain there, then I could sail up there. So that's the other limitation. There's a few ways to get around it. One way would be to have a separate collision grid for sailing. Another way is just to use more numbers than 0 and 1, and that could dictate where you could move to. But the simplest solution is just don't have any mountains touching water. If you do, then don't have it as a collision, or maybe use a different layer. There's plenty of ways around it. I'm just trying to explain to you the limitations we have with vehicles at the moment. Let me just re-enable these layers, and then I'm going to show you something else. So let's just land and then get to the buggy. So at the moment we can still enter the ship from the buggy like this. So that's what we're going to fix next. It's quite easy. So inside the player object step event, so near the top, so we've checked for movement. We checked that we're not moving outside the boundaries of the grid. And then this region is new. So if we are not walking, we're going to check for a collision with another vehicle for where we want to move to. So target X and target Y. So if there is a vehicle, so if this function did not return no one, then we're going to run this code. Vehicle, we're going to create a vehicle on where the player is currently. And the vehicle is going to be of the type the player is currently in. And then we're going to switch the player back to walking. And what's going to happen, so say for example we're moving from a buggy to a ship, the buggy will be spawned on the very last land tile, and we'll see the player walking from that tile to the ship, and then the player becomes a ship. So quite a nice effect. So let's get into the buggy, drive around, and there we go. So we can just move effortlessly from a boat to the buggy without having to press any buttons. But say for example, the next thing we're going to do actually is stop vehicles from entering most of the warps, because I don't know about you, but in my game I wouldn't really want the player to drive around in a buggy inside a village, because that's not what I'm used to in RPGs. So we'll sort that out now. So minimize the movement region, and inside warping, where we check to see if global player can warp is true, we're just going to add this line. So if the player is walking, then wrap this code inside the if statement. And now if we run the game, we can no longer travel to different rooms from the buggy. Like so. Okay, so now we are going to allow the player to exit and enter a vehicle whenever he wants by pressing cancel and OK. To facilitate that, we are going to have a new variable in the create event of our vehicle object called can be entered. What it's for is basically checking to see if the player hasn't just exited the vehicle. So normally most vehicles can be entered will be true, but in the step event we're going to add this code, and straight away after they're created, can be entered will be false. It's going to check for a collision with the player. If no player is found on top of it, then it's going to set can be entered to true, and this isn't going to run again. That's all we need to do for this bit. Now in the player region, open movement again, and we're going to have a new exit region, and we're going to say if global.press cancel and we are not walking, then create a vehicle instance, set the vehicle type to whatever global type vehicle the player was, and then set the player to walking. And for enter vehicle, if we press OK and we are not, if we press OK and we are colliding with a vehicle because it's going to return an ID, then we are going to set the global vehicle variable to whatever vehicle we are on top of and destroy the vehicle. So basically enter the vehicle. One more thing to add down here. So at the very bottom where we, in our check for vehicle region, all we're adding is a check to see if vehicle can be entered is true. If it is, then allow the player to basically walk onto it and enter it. One more thing, when I originally showed you this bit, these two regions, I messed up if can move equals false. This should be encompassing all of this. So I'm just going to open everything and slowly move down just so you can see exactly what I've done. Sorry about that. It's just simply this has been moved from inside here to above there, and then this else statement here. So if global.pl vehicle equals walking or buggy, this code, and then else, this is relating to this bracket here. Otherwise, if it's not walking or a buggy, it's going to be a ship. Do the ship region. If I minimize the regions, it's a bit easier to tell. So if can move equals false encompasses all of this. This bracket here is if can move equals true. That's all of this is if can move is true, and all of this is can move is false. And this last bracket here is this bit here. So I'll just scroll down to the bottom just so you can see that. There we go. Hopefully it didn't cause you too much trouble. But now we can run the game and we can exit and enter the vehicles. Let's drive around in the buggy. Press cancel, press OK, press cancel, you can move around. And with the ship, press cancel, can't move around, that's expected. But if we go to the edge and press cancel, can we still move? No. I had a bug where I could walk around in some places, but I'm glad that isn't so anymore. I'm actually going to, there we go. So yeah, here we can see I can move onto this square. it should be a 1, but obviously it's set to a 0. And now it's classed as land. And same for that tile. So I'm pretty sure this is because we are unblocking tiles when we move as the player. So that's why that bug is occurring, because we're leaving the ship, and then when we move around or try to move, we are unblocking that tile again. So I'm pretty sure that's the reason why. We're going to fix that in a minute though. That's the next thing we're going to cover. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to fix this now before we jump into it. I'm going to show you a little bug testing thing that I do sometimes to test for collisions. It's just basically the for loops from collision, OBJ collision, and with a few modifications. For example, the variables to reference them have to be OBJ collision dots. There's only one object of collision per room, so we can just reference it like that because it's only going to find one of them. And then all we're doing is drawing the contents of the collision grid, so it's just going to display a load of 0 and 1s. So if you run the game, this is what happens without the fix. So every time the player moves off a tile, it gets set to 0. And the original tile that the ship is on is 0, so the player can move to it. But as soon as we move on to it, it becomes 1. And because we're a ship, we're not setting it back to 0, which is exactly what we want. And even if we go back to land, the tile becomes 0 again, so the player can go into it. So this part of our game is working fine. It's when we exit the ship, the 1 becomes a 0, and then if we move up a tile, we haven't reset the 0, so we can move on to it with the player. That's the problem we've got. So the way to fix this is quite simple. If we go into the player step event, where we have enter vehicle, just after we set the global to the vehicle type, we want to check to see if it's a ship, and if there's a collision object. If there is, then we just want to set that cell to 1. So if we now run the game, we should no longer have that same issue. So exit the ship, go back in, it becomes a 1 again. Awesome. Before we go into warping around the edges of the map with the warp objects, before I forget, let's just sort out the speeds for a buggy, because I feel like you should move faster if you're in a buggy. And we're in the movement region obviously, and in this bit here where we're checking if we are not at the target, we're going to set step speed here. So if we are a buggy, step speed is 4, otherwise step speed is 2. So now if we now run the game, actually let me just delete the draw event, because we don't need this anymore from OBJ init. I don't want to have a load of 1s and 0s covering everything. So now we can move faster with the buggy. Cool. Okay, so now we are going to add something to our warp object. In the create event, we're going to say is border equals false. Most warp objects are not going to be a border. We're just going to have 4 of them for the world map, and they're going to be on the border basically. This is what's going to allow us to move around the world with the ship, and it's going to wrap us from edge to edge. And you'll also see why I may or may not have said, depending on editing, whether about the problems about having the world too near the edge, basically. So anyway, let's get on with it. So we've got is border in the create event, and now let's just add the borders now. Let's just do that first of all. Make sure we are on the INS player. layer. And in all 4 of these objects, you want to say is border equals true. And the rest of the work is going to be inside the player step event. Okie doke, so now player step. We're in the warping region. So the first thing we want to do is take this line out. So originally it would have been like this. We'll just take it out and we're going to move it to here because we want to use this twice. We're going to use it inside this if statement, and then this whole thing, so from here to here, is added on. So originally it was like that, and all we've done is pasted this bit here. We're checking if we are a ship and we're colliding with a border, and then we're just telling the player where we're going to be warping to, basically. So if we're moving left, then we want to move to the other side of the room, and the Y is going to be the same. If we're moving right, then we want to move to the left edge of the screen, the room, sorry. Y stays the same. Same kind of thing with the Y coordinates, except this time the X coordinate is going to stay the same. And we need to say player can warp is false, set the facing, and go to the same room. Similar to this, but a few differences. So if we run the game, let's test this out. So you can see that the island kind of disappears. You'd expect to see an island on the left hand side because it wasn't that far away. That's because I've got a small map. The easy way around this is just to have a screen's worth of water on all edges of the map, and that will solve the problem. But there are other ways around it as well. You see here, we're not destroying the ship. That's something else we need to do. Every time we transport, the ship and the buggy are still in the same place they were when room was first created. That's going to be a fairly easy fix as well. We're just going to use global coordinates. It's not very elegant, but it's going to work. We'll also sort out having the ship destroy itself as well. Okay, so that took me far longer than I thought it would because I'm blind, basically. So we're just going to fix both things at the same time. We're going to stop the ship from being around if we're already in a ship, and we're also going to save everyone's coordinates, the vehicle coordinates. We're not going to be using an array. We're just going to be using 4 globals for this. An array would be better if you're going to have more than a few different kinds of vehicles. But if you're just going to have like maybe 3 or 4, I don't think having globals for that is a big deal. It's not too much to manage. So anyway, in the creation event of init, we're going to have global ship X, global ship Y, global buggy X, global buggy Y. And these are going to save our coordinates for our ship and our buggy for when we move rooms. The coordinates are, I just got them from the instance here and here, like that. So now we have done that, let's add these 2 scripts. So SCR load vehicle globals. This is going to be run inside the creation code for the vehicles, and it's just going to check what type of vehicle they are, and set their X and Y to the relevant globals. And save is very similar. It's just checking the player vehicle and saving the globals based on the player XY. This is going to be used for when he exits the vehicle. That's when we're going to save it. Where we are going to place those scripts is 3 times in the player event. So in movement, when we're exiting the vehicle, before we set the global player vehicle to walking, we're going to save the vehicle globals. And again, when we're checking for trying to enter a vehicle whilst already on another vehicle, for example moving from the buggy to a ship, we're going to put it there. Again, that's before we change the global vehicle. And the last time is when we're moving from the ship to land, we put it there as well. And then the last thing we need to do is in the world, for the buggy, in the creation code, we're just going to run scr load vehicle globals. And in the ship, we're going to have 2 things. We are going to destroy the ship if the player is already in the ship. So this is going to work for when the player moves into the borders. And we're also going to run the loads script there. You don't need these debug messages. So let's run the game. Let's make sure all this is working. So if I get in the buggy first and then drive up to the ship, and I go from the ship to the other side of the world and back, there shouldn't be another ship, and the buggy should be in the place where we left it. And if that is the case, then everything has worked. Yay! Okay, cool. So that is it for today. Thank you for the great suggestion. If you have any more things you'd like to see in the RPG starter kit that aren't on the roadmap, then let me know. But apart from that, bye for now.